this time around, we are going to be talking about what to do or how we approached a scenario where a competitor started aggressively bidding on one of our clients' keywords. So I think this is a sort of a fascinating phenomenon, and there's actually a couple of different ways that we could solve this. So hopefully this is an interesting conversation today, and there's a lot of food for thought around how to approach this when it does happen, because it inevitably does happen.
Always happens. I think it's the second you start getting traction, they'll come for you.
Absolutely. I think the interesting one here was we were working with a retail client, and they came onto the scene. I think they're also around about 2 years old now. Been in business for a couple of years. Launched, started getting some incredibly positive reviews, started getting traction, and then noticed a bit of a decline. So they noticed a decline. It's about 40% reduction in traffic coming to their website from branded terms. So we did a bit of a deep dive on that and noticed that competitors were pretty aggressively bidding on the specific brand term of their business. So it's an interesting one. For me, I find it fascinating because there's so much conventional wisdom out there that says defend your brand term, but there's, I think, an emotional response and there is and maybe a rational response, and I think my rational side of the brain always takes over. I think emotionally you see it and you think, hey, that's my traffic, get off it. But the challenge with that is you can then create a race to the bottom. You and your competitor are both fighting over scraps, essentially. If you look online, I'd actually read a really interesting blog before this episode today, and one of the the real pros that it laid out for bidding on your own brand term was, it said it's a lower cost per click than non-branded terms. And the thing that sort of immediately came to mind is that was only telling half of the story. Yes, bidding on your own branded term typically is cheaper cost per click than bidding on a generic term. So, if someone's searching for, hotels versus your specific hotel, as an example, it tends to be cheaper to bid on your own brand term. But what that doesn't tell you is, would that person have come anyway? And measuring that is actually really, really complicated. But I was fortunate enough to work with an incredible data team in a previous business where we were able to measure this. And what was interesting to me was trying to go through a period of understanding, should we bid on a brand term or should we not? And for this particular company, they had a very, very strong brand. And when we looked at analyzing this through a regression analysis, which essentially went through a process of bidding on our brand term for a month and then not bidding on our brand term for a month. And we turned it on and turned it off in multiple different countries, and then looked to analyze what was the impact in search traffic from branded keywords, how many people would have clicked organically if we weren't bidding on their own term, which is a challenging decision to make, because you're essentially going into the unknown. But for us, it varied from market to market. And what was fascinating about this is the markets where we were doing more partnerships, where we're doing more podcasts, where we're doing more brand building work, the higher percentage of traffic would have come anyway. So we actually worked out that only between 10 and 20% of the traffic was being intercepted by our competitors when we weren't bidding on our own term. So the fascinating thing for me there is it kind of gives you different approaches to this. Like, do you try and block out that competitor? But then in reality, both of you are then are fighting over the same piece of the pie. You're not actually growing that audience, you're just fighting over the people that are already searching for it. So I know you've got great thoughts on this as well, James, but thinking about, rather than fighting over what's that conversion rate of the people that are searching for that term, try and increase the amount of people that are searching for them, try and increase the strength of the brand, so that when people search for you, they come to you rather than getting distracted or intercepted by competitors on the way through.
And I think this is one of the things, anything in marketing, I think this is one of the things that winds me up the most, is because it's, the way I've always seen it is if I'm, and me actually searching, if I'm searching for something, I want to see that product, but I also understand there's an element of intelligence around stealing that traffic. And I think it could be done with, I've seen it, when it's been done well, it's been done with comedy. So it's almost like you might search for Coca-Cola, and it's obviously this doesn't happen, but it would be a Pepsi ad. And if that's better than Coca-Cola, try us type thing. I think that when it's light humor works, but I think it frustrates me because you've done such a good job of selling your brand and your story. And I think that's where the time and effort should be spent, because I think ultimately if people are going to be clicking on another link, like I've done it before, I'll click on another link, but I'll always end up on what I'm searching for. But I know not everyone always does that. And I think if you're searching for it as an actual brand, I would expect people to still land on that brand. So spending against that, to me, is not the right way to do it. And I think you were alluding to it there, is like, how do you then get more people in the top of the funnel? How do you story tell so you're telling a much better story, that you're getting people interested in your brand, that even if there is a witty ad at the top of that of Google, they click it, they have a look, but they ultimately come down to you. And I think that's where that whole storytelling piece comes in, or storytelling, the social part, the like you said, the podcasts. It's about building that long-term relationship, so that when they are having their heads turned by others, and that will continue to happen. That'll happen on Instagram, because they'll start following you around the internet because they know what you're searching for. That, no, I want that product. And that probably goes into a much deeper conversation of products and things like, is your product better, and a lot more. You could delve a lot more into that. But I just think when it's from when you're competing with competitors on Google in that sense, I don't think that's the best use of money, personally.
That's a good point as well, is around budget utilization. Like, how much money can you afford to spend on bidding on your own term? I think what's interesting here is whenever I've seen cases made for it being a positive, there's always that discussion around, but the traffic is cheap, so it makes sense to do it. But overlooking that point I made earlier around, you're not ideally, in an ideal scenario, the traffic comes to you anyway and you don't pay for that traffic. You're not having to pay. You would have done some form of marketing to generate that search intent. Nobody just has a dream about your product and searches for it. Something would have triggered them to search for your brand to begin with. You've got them but you've got awareness somewhere from them, so Absolutely. They know you and they see So then, are you potentially the detriment of shifting money into defending your brand term? Is you aren't doing what you were doing before that was making people want to come and search for you. So this is where I sort of see there's an element of a race to the bottom in it, because if you shift budget out of brand building, brand awareness that actually generates a search intent to try and capture the search intent, you're paying to capture the customer twice. But then you also aren't doing enough to actually build that brand up. And I think that this is where I find it very interesting, particularly around PPC, on either Google search or if you're in an app business on Apple search ads, is where else could you spend that money? How sophisticated is your competitors' approach to paid acquisition through intercept type channels such as Google paid search? Because you could also find an opportunity that they may be overlooking that still generates you traffic or brings you new customers. I think this is the sort of the big challenge, and particularly with a smallest business or an earlier stage, or even self-funded, is you don't have limitless pots of cash to throw at. And I think it's thinking about those different stages of the customer. How do they go from awareness through to capturing of that demand? But also, I think one important part to consider here is, what's your point of differentiation in the market? Because the example I used earlier, they had a very, very unique product and a very strong brand. So I actually probably think that in markets where you may be trading solely on price, if your competition, if you're trading solely on price, you think about, the example that always comes to mind is insurance. Insurance companies spend a fortune on intercept marketing, on paid ads, because a lot of the time the customer thought process is, need insurance, better get that sorted, and you just go to find insurance, whatever you need. You're not actually really that brand loyal. You're just like, does it give me the coverage I need? How expensive is it? Box ticked. So you tend to see an incredibly high cost per click on terms related to, say, car insurance, home insurance, because the differentiation in competition is price. But I think if you have a stronger product, then you have the opportunity to really talk about and elevate your product point of differences in the market, so that when people search for you, they're more likely to land on your page rather than engaging in that sort of bidding war, race to the bottom. And I think the thing that fundamentally frustrates me about it is it essentially shrinks the pie. You're constantly shrinking because you're just fighting back and forth over essentially a reducing number of people that are interesting in your brand, if that's all of where you spend your money.
Yeah, I think the only place I would probably use it is, let's just say, so we work with a HR outsourcing company, and as we saw, so when you start competing with some of the big guys in that space, you've got your deals, you've got like the big Silicon Valley backed companies. Their whole objective is to acquire at any cost, because it's a longevity play. It's not like it's not necessarily a you're focused on every penny per se. I know they will obviously look at every penny, but their focus is on how can we acquire as much as we can acquire, as fast as we can acquire, to grow it, to get that next level of funding, etc., etc. I think when you go into that world of competing against people like that, you're gonna max out within sort of probably, I don't know, 10 minutes, if that, like two clicks, and you're probably done with your daily allowance. So I think that's the only time I would say to sort of use that approach, is if you're a bigger group, or if you're, and I was going to flip the question actually. So we're sort of being negative in the sense of we wouldn't do it for our clients. Would you attack others? Because I think if you put a bit of comedy to it, so if let's just say you were like flipped it a bit, would you start competing against your competition? So obviously we're saying not to defend, but would you attack? Because I think if you did it, like I said earlier, where it's a bit of a comical sort of way of, we're better than this, or we're better than the companies below, or something like that. There's a bit of comedy to it. Do you then bring them into your funnels to then you start? And I actually don't like that approach to marketing, because I think it's a very sort of dark cloak type marketing.
Yeah.
But with comedy, can you actually turn it into a positive, where you, depending on the product, but where you then you as a customer relate to that brand, and then you get them into your funnel, and you then start sort of storytelling, and you build that. Is that a way that what's your thoughts on that?
It's like game theory. Do you force them to defend their own brand exactly, so that they're not bidding on yours?
And I'm not saying a major group, because you can't. But if it's a smaller competitor that's maybe not got that marketing understanding of how this necessarily works, would you go?
I think it really depends on like brand tone of voice, and whether that fits with your brand approach. Like, I think about well-known betting company in the UK that's known for being a little bit provocative. I feel like they could get away with that because it fits in with their just general approach to marketing overall.
Or Ryanair, we're cheaper than the below.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where they are that comedy sort of brand, they can be, a bit risque with their sort of tone and brand.
Yeah, which I think for them, it makes sense in the wider scheme of their holistic approach to marketing. I think for me, what I find interesting is looking at it on a case-by-case basis and understanding where the opportunities are. But also, I think one of the things to think about is, how can you measure this yourself? How can you look at what the impact is within your own specific business? I think tools like Google Search Console are so valuable because they show you how many people search for your brand or a particular keyword, and then how many people click through to your site. So I think what you have the opportunity to do there is look at testing different approaches and seeing what that does to your click-through on particular terms. If you are, maybe in the position of defending your brand term at the moment and considering, actually maybe I do switch that out into something that is generating demand rather than trying to intercept the demand that's already there. Understanding what works for your business and where are the areas of competition, because I do find that when you see businesses that kind of go after their competition, that approach of copying or attacking or putting down the competition rather than building up yourself, for me is indicative of a company that's maybe a step behind. They're a following rather than a leading company.
Yeah.
So does that give you an opportunity to attack something else elsewhere, like let's say long tail keywords, for example, or are they wasting money on broad match keywords because they're being quite lazy and they're not necessarily giving the ad platform the context that it needs to understand what the right traffic is? How can you really, really zero in on, actually, yes, I want to pay for these people because they are undecided. I think that for me is where I really like to try and find opportunity for clients is how does someone indicate to you that they're undecided? The beauty of paid ad channels such as Google Search or Apple Search is customers are telling you exactly what they're looking for. And you have an opportunity to personalize your response to them. You have an opportunity to bid on very specific terms. But what I find fascinating is when you can sort of see how sophisticated a competitor is based on what type of keywords they're engaging on, or are they just essentially throwing money in and letting it aside? Because I think context is so important. I know we talked about hotels in a previous episode, but one of the things that I find interesting is when if you were to sort of broad match on accommodation in Sri Lanka, then Google would give you responses for people looking for hostels or 5-star hotels and anything in between. But actually, for the business that we were talking about in the previous episode, they're towards the more luxury boutique end of the market. So actually spending money on those, it wouldn't make sense for them to bid on competitors that weren't necessarily aligned to the offering that they had, or it wouldn't make sense for them to broadly go after people that were just kind of looking for a place to stay. So I think that is a kind of given a bit of a non-answer here, but I think one of the things whenever working with a client, I don't like to come in with a set in stone framework. It's more about looking at the data and understanding where the opportunities are, because the data is there. It's just it's unlocking the possibilities from that data and finding out what is your particular angle for your business, and how can you again look at acquiring customers profitably and finding that opportunity. Yeah,
and I think I can't remember who said it, but I think I've said it a few times to you before in the office, but it's that phrase of, and I think firstly I think there's an opportunity in your Ryanairs, your UK gambling company that can be funny in their storytelling. They could steal customers, for want of a better word, in a funny, comical way that doesn't then look like sort of dark cloak. And but the point you said about the focus on your business, and that's something I'd like even years ago I like personally changed, that is everyone will start attacking you. And you can either focus on everyone else, and it's like you said, they're probably a step behind you 9 times out of 10, or they're ahead of you and you're becoming a threat to them. And I think it's the saying is, to build the biggest tower, you can focus on growing your own business, building your own tower, or you can knock down everyone else's tower around you. And I think that, to me, it's just that with marketing as well, is like, just focus on your customers, your product, and how you tell that story. And on the data side as well, is it's like when we sort of obviously started working together, and you went into the weeds, as I like to say. When you start seeing it, and you think, you're up against, in some of our clients, they're up against advanced marketing teams, or what you think. And when you dig into the keywords, and you start like, actually, there's a huge opportunity here. Like, it could be something like, I don't know, if you were going to a bookshop, for example, they'll just do bookshop in Dubai, for example. But you can actually break that down to, I don't know, best place to buy drama novels in Dubai, for example, because that one's got 200 searches a month, and no one's even sort of bothering about that and sort of looking at it. So I think it's then storytelling around that, and looking at, like, it's a great way to sort of attack competition in a more positive way. You're not attacking, but you're sort of defending your position and growing your own brand, really. I think in summary with it is, I think from what you said, it's each client's different. I think you have to judge whether to, and I'm not saying again to attack the competition, but I think it's a focus on what works for your business. But the main focus of what you do should be about your brand, your customers, your product, and your marketing and your storytelling of that, basically. I think that's the sort of takeaway I would do it, sort of give to that, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's sometimes a lot more difficult to measure strength of brand, and I think this is why you will see a lot of advice that is, bid on your own term, because it's that last click attribution. It's almost a bit of a false flag, in a sense of, it looks like it's going well, but it will degrade over time. And I think, going back to your point there of, focusing on building the biggest tower, and, really being aware of what the competition is doing, but focusing on building your own brand, building your own strength of brand, and, looking at some of the stuff that are a little bit more difficult to measure, but can help you build a much more robust business over time. Yeah.
I think I'm going to say the final point, because I think this sums it up quite well. And I wanted to get them into the heart of the podcast, was if I searched Newcastle United shirt and Manchester United shirt came up, is that sponsored ad? I want to be clicking the Newcastle United ad. I think that's quite a nice way to think about how that sort of, because I'm a fan, I'm part of the community, it's loyal. That's how I would summarize it.